So, Harvey, our Christian audience is global. People listen to this from all over the world, on every continent. So, not everyone listening to this conversation know you as Bishop D'Souza and I know you. In fact, some people are just getting to know you for the first time. So, here's my first question: Who is Harvey Kwiyani?
Oh my God! Wow.
Yeah, tell us your story. Yeah.
I am a Malawian, born and bred in Malawi. But I left Malawi quite a few years ago, having sensed a call to mission to Europe, actually.
Wonderful.
So I came to Switzerland, worked in Switzerland, needed to learn German, went to Germany, stayed in Germany for a year, went back to Switzerland, and then came to the UK here, did my master's, went to the US, did a PhD. I came back to the UK, where I now work as a CEO of Global Connections, while teaching in several colleges on issues to do with theology, mission, and world Christianity.
Excellent. It's great to have you in our program, especially as you are a historian of the African church. Most people think, which is not true, you and I know it's not true, that Christianity originated only when the Western missionaries came to...
Well, wait, Bishop. Christianity didn't start in Georgia?
No.
I thought it started in Georgia.
No, it didn't start in Georgia, nor did it start in Oxford. Began long ago in Africa. So the question is, as you have considered African history, Christian history, who are some of your African historical figures that you admire, look up to, and these heroes need to be sort of globalized and others need to come to know about them?
Yes, I mean, we can start back in the very first few hundred years of Christianity. And so people like Athanasius.
Most people wouldn't know he was an African, That's the sad thing. Go ahead.
There's a joke about Athanasius that people called him the Black Dwarf because he was Black African and he was short.
Wow, wow.
But we could talk about Augustine. Yes, his father was European, but his mother was African, a Berber African.
Berber, yeah,
so that's right. Yeah, Tertullian, living in Nigeria, doing theology in Latin, which was the vernacular for his people at the time, right? And it's from there that he becomes the father of Latin theology, the father of Western theology. But he's an African living in Africa, right? And then there are quite a few others are around that era. But as we go down the centuries, there are also many figures. There was a kingdom of, there were Christian kingdoms in the Sudan area for a long time, right? That just disappeared.
Wow.
Their history was only discovered back in the 60s. And people went in and did archaeology and found all these wars of Christian writings and histories that actually extend for a period of 1,000 years, when there was a vibrant Christian communities in Sudan that just disappeared like that. We could talk about Ethiopia. We could talk about the Christian kingdom of the Congo that existed for a good 200 years, from 1500 to 1700, with its key leaders. Many of them actually point towards what's happening in Christianity today. There was a young woman called Kimpavita, or Donna Beatrice, a prophetess, quite powerful. She was so prophetic that her death came because both the church and the community condemned her for her brave acts against colonialism, against the church, and her trusting in God. She was condemned as a witch by the community. She was condemned as a prophetess by the missionaries, and that's how she died.
My goodness.
So those
my
are some
goodness.
of the key names, and then there's a lot going on in Africa today. Some really good names of African theologians, John Beatty and others, that actually speak not just for the African community, not just to the African community. They are voices that the world, especially the world of Christianity, needs to know about, needs to learn from.
Yeah, Johnnie, you know, the first few names, and of course, lots of names. The African roots of our Christian faith is not known.
No.
In the Christian world, it's not known in the non-Christian world. Our faith is not just Middle Eastern. Our faith is African, and that's why somebody like Harvey is so keen for us to talk to. And most don't know that a lot of sociologists and thinkers consider Augustine as the framer of the Western civilization. If that is correct, then you have a Berber, mixed African, giving birth to the Western civilization. Have you thought about that?
No, I love this conversation, but I love history. Okay, so I'm glad we're in history class for a few minutes here. One thing that strikes me about Augustine is his amazing testimony. But when he was wandering away, it was the prayers of his mother, right, which God answered and brought him back. But those prayers of African moms to this day, I mean, this is one of the great strengths of the church in the world are the prayers of African women. And I totally agree. We don't know the stories of the global church, and people need to know these stories. You know, Thomas was not the least of all the apostles, you know, because he was doubting Thomas. He's the only apostle that touched the wounds of Jesus, and he took the gospel all the way to India. Like, we need Christians to understand these stories. And Harvey, one of my favorites, I spent a lot of time in the Middle East, and when ISIS was killing all of these Christians, I was sitting with a leader of a country, and I was appealing to this Muslim leader to help the Christians. And I said, you know this story, but in early Islamic history, the Muslims were being killed by the tribes around, and they had to flee. And who took them in? An Ethiopian Christian king provided refuge to these persecuted Muslims. And I was sitting with this Muslim leader, and this Muslim state, and I said, now we need you to return the favor, because Christians in the Middle East are in trouble. And the story of the historic African church is not only alive today because of the vibrancy of the African church, but its history matters today too.
And Harvey, living out here and doing what you do, this wonderful history, etc. Does it give confidence to you in your leadership role that you have such a rich history and legacy, or because of what history has done, colonialism and everything else, do you also have to struggle? Maybe you have to struggle a little bit with the after effects of colonialism, as if Christianity came to Africa with colonialism.
I was teaching a class yesterday.
Yeah.
This is the first class with a new group of students looking at the African church history, and so we talk about Acts 2, right? Luke mentions the Egyptians and the Libyans, but what he does not mention there is that the upper room was in the house of John Mark's mother, and they had just returned from Libya, right? That John Mark himself was born in Libya, as an African Jew, so to speak. That at that point in time, there were more Jews living in Alexandria than in Jerusalem. That possibly when Jesus went to Africa with the parents as a child, it was to family in the diaspora. So there is that history that then begins to sort of affirm what we are doing now, that as African Christians are beginning to take mission seriously, we're doing something that's been done before.
Yes.
That whether it's Paul coming from Antioch, is being sent off by this multicultural team that includes at least 2 Africans mentioned in Acts 13.
Yeah.
Or whether it's Apollos or Alexander and Rufus, and all these people that are coming from Africa that are actually involved in mission right at the beginning of the story. And what we're doing now, what we're seeing now, is just a continuation of that story. Of course, it's happening in a world where, the hierarchy of the nation, the hierarchy of the civilizations makes it difficult for Africans to actually do this. But they have been involved in this right from the beginning.
So let's go there for a minute. What are we seeing now as the African diaspora all over Europe and other parts of the world, certainly in my country, in the United States, is impacting Christianity in London, in Houston, Texas, in places all over the world? Is the African church re-evangelizing Europe, or is that taking it too far?
The African church is growing in Europe. That's a given fact. Here in the UK, we know for sure that if the church is growing anywhere, it's the African migrants. Oh, actually, we could generalize. It's the migrants, so that would include the Asians, Latin Americans, but on top of that list is the African migrants. We know for sure that on any Sunday in London, more than 60% of church attendance is Black. That's a given fact. Any Sunday, more than 60%, and Africans, Afro-Caribbeans form only 14% of London's population.
Wow.
So you have 14% of the population accounting for 60% of church attendance. That is something. I used to teach at a university here in the UK, and when I interacted with my students, first-year students, I taught an introduction to Christian theology to first-year students. My students would be all white, and of course, I'd ask them, do you know any Christians? And they would invariably say the Africans, the Nigerians, the Ghanaians, and maybe the South Koreans, the Chinese, and the Brazilians. But for them, for these young people that I encountered teaching here in the UK, Christianity is identified with Black people. And that's in the UK, that's in Europe. So there is that going on, that African Christianity is actually slowly beginning to become the representative Christianity in some cities in Europe. That you take away African Christians from the cities, things would collapse. And a good example is London. Now, their presence, of course, we celebrate they are the visible Christians in most places, but they are praying. I've never met an African church that doesn't have at least a night of prayer once a month.
Wow.
And they're doing everything they can. Some of them are running.
I'm not sure I've ever sorry, Harvey, but I'm not sure I've ever met a white Christian that has a night of prayer once a month. I'm exaggerating. I do know a few, but it's a very very small selection. That is incredible. The church
I know
in London is the African church.
Here in Liverpool, we have several African churches that will have night of prayers every Friday. Every Friday of the year, people gather to pray.
Wow!
Right, and so they bring that vibrancy, that keen focus on touching the spirit world to try and see what God can do for them here in Europe. They are praying. They love evangelizing. They may not necessarily have figured out how to evangelize Westerners, but if you will see people on the street, generally speaking, giving out tracts and doing some form of evangelism, chances are it's going to be Africans. So I think something is happening. I do think that if this goes on for a few years, we will get to a place where Africans can actually successfully evangelize Westerners. But that's just beginning now.
Yeah, yeah. And these African churches, which I've been to a couple here in London. How long is it going to take for the African churches and leaders to have confidence and bring in more non-Black people, I mean, the white people, into their congregations, or other white lapsed Christians or whatever? They're not going to feel comfortable coming into Black churches.
That's a very important question. And it can be answered in several layers. I think the main problem that we have with this whole development is that for most Africans, mission is still what Europeans did in Africa. So it comes with a cultural supremacy and cultural superiority and other things that the people you convert have to adopt your culture. Right? Exactly what the Europeans did in Africa.
Yeah.
And the Africans are now beginning to realize that actually mission does not require us to do that. And that actually we can evangelize without having to make these Europeans Africans. But that's a process. I think that's happening by they're learning by experience. They're beginning to realize this because they've realized actually what we're trying to do is not working.
That's good.
But still, I do think that, and this goes both ways. The Africans are trying. Believe it or not, but they take it as a great victory when they have white people in their churches. That's that's still colonial history, right? That if you have white people identifying with you, you are somebody. So a lot of them take that as as an honor. We have white people among us. They really want to have white people among them, and they try to do what they can to bring in white people into their congregations. But also white people, as far as I hear conversations around here, most of the white British people do not really think it's the right thing to sit under an African Christian leader. It's all that. So even though the Africans are trying their best, the Europeans are still holding out because you can't follow a Black bishop or you can't follow a black leader, and we hear that quite often around here. So that's a challenge.
So you've mentioned several lessons already about prayer and a few other things, but what are more lessons that the rest of the church should learn from the majority world church, in particular the African church?
I think that the biggest lesson that we can learn from the African church is that the Enlightenment destroyed European Christianity, European faith, and with that, the Christianity that has been exported from Europe and North America to the rest of the world, and that the Africans come in with a worldview that's not really been touched by the Enlightenment. And so they can really believe that God is spirit, and the Spirit of God moves and touches people and heals and does all these things. Without doing that, we tend to do Christianity as something that's just cerebral. That you have to know these facts about Jesus, and then you are saved. The African Christian will go a step further and say that you have to engage the Spirit of God, in order to be a good follower of Christ. And I think that is one of the most important things that we can learn from African Christians.
Yeah. And this emphasis on the spirituality that recognizes there is another reality outside of the rational reality, right?
Yes.
Material reality of the spirit of God, of angels and all. Is that one of the reasons there's such vibrancy within the church? I mean, you just mentioned about the lady who was killed for being a prophetess. Those are strange sounding words for those who have come out of an Enlightenment Christianity. And how can you, we see that in the Bible, but it's not for today. But do you think that cultural view where you're not affected by Enlightenment, where you're pre-modern and you approach things much more holistically, one of the reasons that the African church continues to grow?
Oh, yes. I mean, speaking as an African here, the Christian faith is about the spirit, the spirit world. Right? That's I mean, God is spirit, poured out his spirit upon all flesh. Those who worship him must worship in spirit and in truth. The spirit is quite visible in the text. In African culture, even before we become Christians, we are fully aware of the spirit world. And so when we become Christians and we see the spirit in the Bible, it just feels like, actually, this is what we've been dying for. This is what we've been looking for.
Wow.
And then that allows us to engage this Christian faith as a spiritual faith that it is. Now, the result of that is, for example, as we're talking about prayer, right? That, I mean, if there's a thing I miss about Africa is prayer, right? I've been out here in the West for more than 20 years. I never prayed like I prayed in Africa, and I mean it's many of us, but the prayer is understood as something that you do to engage the spirit world, right? That actually, if you do not pray, let me back up a little. Even in non-Christian world, before people become Christians, the understanding that you need a powerful spiritual force behind you to make it in life. It's normal. If your chickens are not reproducing well, you worry about the spirit force behind me. Is it not powerful enough to make this happen? Your cows are not reproducing. It's not just the biology of cows not reproducing. You wonder, is there a spiritual force behind this? And is the spiritual force behind me unable to make way for me? Right? And it's that understanding of life that then allows us to pray as much as we do, because we know that in prayer we are increasing the power, the spiritual power behind us, right? The force that comes and makes things happen for us, and that changes things for us as Christians.
Johnnie, is my thoughts are going in different directions as I'm hearing Harvey, and about the Enlightenment. In the Western world, even as Christianity has declined, the interest in spiritualism has proportionately increased. And I see on many podcasts and all, young people, whether they're Indian, American, everything, they're talking about this language. There's no energy here. And they're all talking about another reality. Do you think the Western form of Christianity has missed this, and is something that we can learn from our African brothers?
Well, the last part of that, there is so much we must learn. I mean, this Harvey, this whole conversation has been so enriching to me spiritually. Listening, I just want to listen to you tell more stories and talk more, and it's like a spiritual shot in the arm. And I think so much of the church where I come from needs to be more acquainted with the majority world church. That's why we're having these conversations. But Bishop, I think I think everyone expected more atheists in the world. And what we ended up with is a world equally spiritual and or religious, just putting that energy in different directions. And I remember when I moved to Los Angeles, coming from the deep South in the United States, in the heart of the Bible Belts, and people were, it's a secular place and Hollywood and all of these things. But what I found in Los Angeles was I found everybody looking for something. They were just putting in all kinds of different directions. It was the single most spiritual city I had ever been to in my life. It's just they were trying to find something. And I also think this is the power of the gospel. When the gospel is like it's like it's the old adage from the mathematician who I'm sure whose name you'll remember, that there's a God-shaped vacuum. Yeah, it's like a God-shaped hole inside of our hearts, and people are filling that hole with everything else. And they choose the path of their mind, or they choose the path of their heart. And in my case, it was like sometimes my mind was in my faith and sometimes my heart was in my faith. But it never was the case that I didn't have one or the other. But in the Western church, we are definitely on the path of the mind now. And we need a resuscitation. And that's what I hear in this conversation, Harvey. I hear a resuscitation of the global church with the spirit of the African and broader it's the same thing is true in Brazil. The broader diaspora of our own diaspora, our Christian diaspora around the world. I do have a question though, Harvey. A lot of these immigrant communities are first generation immigrants, and so they're bringing it with them. So what is the risk that they sort of like assimilate into the secular culture? Like, how do you preserve the same power into the second generation, the third generation, to make sure that the faith of the fathers is passed down?
Yeah,
because it might take us a few generations to catch it. Those of us who aren't in the African church.
It will definitely take a few generations. What's happening with the African church, for example, is that to preserve their faith, most African Christians will belong in an African church, whether in London, Liverpool, wherever. And they're doing that to keep their faith. There will be a few who will join the Church of England here and other churches, but most people, and actually most people will, even if they are in an Anglican church here or a Methodist, or they will have another African fellowship that they attend to fill up spiritually. Right now, the problem comes in that the second generation, their children, our children, are culturally British, and when we take them into our congregations, they feel out of place. Now, and for us, first generation, we were discipled in Africa, right? I remember, I think at the age of 10, my parents take me up the hill for 3-day and night prayers.
Wow.
And you do that at 10, it sustains you. But when we are here in the West, one, we don't know how to do that with our children. We were discipled in our schools by our friends. Remember preaching my first sermon to my fellow 13, 14-year-olds in high school. Right? The kids here do not have spaces for that. So we end up with a situation where the first generation really does not know how to disciple their own children. In the diaspora, they do not know. I mean, they do not know what it means to grow up as an African teenager in London, right? So that becomes difficult. But also it becomes difficult for the kids because they cannot find the kind of mentorship they need in the other churches around us. So I think we're seeing a problem of having a generation of African kids with the potential. They understand the whole Christianity thing, because their parents drag them to church, right? But they're not being discipled in ways that make sense to them, and they are left in a vacuum. So my plea has always been, can we find new ways to disciple our young people in the diaspora? And if we look back here in the UK, when we talk about migrant Christianity, I think the stories go back to the 1950s when the Welsh came to England, for example, as migrants coming to England. And then we have the West Indians coming in the 50s, 60s. The Africans started really coming in the 70s. But we realized that actually, in all that history, migrant congregations would not last more than 2 generations. Right? That by the time the second generation is mature, that church is done. Mm. And so I raise up questions with the leaders around here and say, how can we avoid that with our children? I think we're just starting a conversation. I don't know what will come out of it. It will take a few years, probably. It may take a few decades before we actually nail down how do we best disciple our children so that they stay in the faith and pass it on to their children in the diaspora.
Harvey, you've been leading Global Connections for what, 2-3 years now?
2 years.
2 years. You're probably the first non-Western leader of this alliance. Am I correct? Wrong?
Yes.
An African, and you got all these missions started mostly from here, but some from America, but majority, led by Westerners, some by non-Westerners. As you navigate the leadership of these group of mission societies, what kind of insight or foresight do you bring as you look out to the world and these mission societies look out to the world? Can they carry on doing what they used to do all this while? Do they need to change? Do you see change happening? What do you see is going on outside of Britain, in Africa, Asia, etc., that Christians here need to look at?
This may sound rather blunt, but I think the era of the Western mission to the rest of the world, that era is gone.
Okay.
And the sooner we realize that, the better. The future of mission must involve all of us. Mm. The West still leads because it has the money, but really nothing else. Probably theological scholarship for centuries that actually struggles to contextualize itself for the rest of the world. But I imagine a future where even if it's British mission in the world, it will involve the Nigerians and the Indians and the Brazilians who are living in Britain today as people who got a sense from Britain to other parts of the world. That means that a lot of the power dynamics that we see in mission today have to shift. Mm. The church itself here in the UK, the Christian community is very diverse, right? As I said earlier, the most visible Christians in some cities in the UK are Black Christians. So the Christian landscape is diverse. The mission world is not. Mm. It's still very much a white British world. Yeah. That's just the reality. When we gather as mission leaders, there will be no diversity there. Impossible.
And isn't that an anomaly, Johnnie, that at a time when British white attendance to church has declined, as we have heard today from the parliamentarian as well, and that majority people attending churches are, there should be a movement of missions from the Blacks, man, and all these immigrants. Why, this sort of monopoly because of money or whatever. That,
I mean,
and why? I mean, he said it's over. The time for that is over because of many factors.
it's I had an experience just yesterday where in my family's life there was a something that clearly involved God's divine intervention. And as I was walking through the streets of London, I decided I was going to duck into a church just to take a few minutes and pray and thank God for saving the lives of people. And I couldn't get in the church without a ticket. I thought, like, I mean, there surely is a quarter to pray. And I just, I guarantee if I'd have found an African church, or a Brazilian church, or an Arab church, that I would have not only been able to pray, but I'd have found other people praying there too.
Yeah.
And yet in Christian history, our leaders have very rarely been those that everyone thought was in charge. Leadership, as a famous author said, is influence. And as I see it, traveling all around the world to countless countries, the Christian leaders in the world are the majority church.
Yeah. And Johnny, Harvey is in a very unique position. I don't think there is a mission alliance in any part of the world, Western world, which is led by somebody not from that world. So, we need our audience to pray for him.
Yeah.
And to stand with him. And Harvey, we want you to stand there. We are with you. There are many like you. And to talk to...
I want to take your class, Harvey.
Yes. And so this podcast is the beginning of a conversation that Johnny and I will have related to African issues and Christianity and race. So we have not gone everywhere, but thank you for giving us this time, Harvey.
Thank you. It's been a privilege.
Awesome, Harvey. That was amazing. This was such an enriching conversation. So I add my thanks to the bishop. No,
I'll be in touch with you. Okay.
All right. Thank you, Bishop.
Bye-bye.
God bless you. Bye.
So good. Really, really powerful. Okay.
Good conversation.
Hi, Marcus.
Reflections?
Yeah, I just said today there was a really good soundbite at the end there that was like for me, but there was plenty more other as well.
Yeah, we will come back to this African Christianity, which is something we need to put on the map to this podcast.
So do you want to go straight on to your concluding thoughts?
Yeah. Johnny, Harvey, and us. What are your thoughts?
There are so many things from this conversation I'll remember. One, the fact that Jesus, when his family took him to Egypt, they were probably taking him to family.
Yeah.
Right. It wasn't just, it wasn't just he was going to Egypt because that was the nearest country in that time period. And I got multiple theology degrees. I've been in church my whole life. I've preached in the largest churches in the world. But that had never clicked for me in the way it clicked. The interconnectedness of Africa and the early the beginnings of our incredible movement. Christianity is the most diverse movement in human history, not just because it's true, but because of the way it spreads. Because if you're if you're a part of another religion, you have to read the language very often. You have to come from a particular culture, understand a particular culture. But Christianity, you can worship God in your own language. You can read the Bible in your own language. You can bring everything you have and love about your culture with you. And there's so many blessings from the African church that for so many really I want to say dumb reasons, lots of reasons. The Western Church is not getting, and we got a lot of those lessons in this conversation, especially about prayer.
Yeah, absolutely. And the spirit world and the reality of it in most parts and most cultures and most of the majority cultures. And you and I and others, of course, need to reclaim our African heritage at a time when people are trying to attack the Christian faith, the Christian community. In my part of the world, it's a Western religion, which it is not a Western, it's an African, Asian religion. But we have talked about Middle East, but we never said this is an African religion. Once we said this is an African faith, and those were our church fathers. The guy who was the Black Dwarf, a great theologian and a great bishop of the church. I mean, there's no answer to those things, but we have not articulated it enough, and we have allowed this part of the story to be sort of blanked out from the Christians we are teaching and discipling, etc.
And that's in the power of all of us to tell these stories to our children, to our churches, around dinner tables. One of the reasons why we're doing this podcast to bring together an Eastern and a Western perspective on critical conversations. Meeting in London to do it, one of the most diverse cities in the world, a city where the majority of Christians in church on Sunday are from Africa, is to help people not only think through these issues, but to learn so that they can pass it along. And there was also a warning to us in this conversation. It won't be passed to the next generation on accident. We have to do it. And that's something we all have to do a little more of.
Thank you.